Welcome to Reclaiming My Life, the podcast where we explore the journey of breaking free from limiting beliefs, finding your truth, and reclaiming the life you were meant to live. I'm Diane Green, here to guide you through honest conversations, personal stories, and transformative insights. Whether you're deconstructing religion, redefining your spirituality, or simply seeking freedom and clarity, this is the space for you. And today we are talking with Darante Martin. Hey,
Hello.
Darante. How are you today?
I am doing very well. Thank you so much for having me today.
Yes, thank you for coming. So I neglected to get a bio from you. So can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, absolutely. And again, I apologize. It wasn't your neglect. I did not send it. But yes, I spent about 2 decades in active ministry. Half of that time as a not just a pastor, but a church planner. Built my church from the ground up. Actually built two churches from the ground up. The second one was my more quote unquote successful church. And
Mhm.
that's where I kind of got my claim to fame, rising up a little bit in the urban mega church scene, which I had been kind of part of ever since I had gotten out of high school. I had been mentored by people like Bishop Eddie L. Long, Apostle Ron Carpenter, oh darn it, Dr. R.A. Vernon out of Cleveland, Ohio. And then
Yeah.
my last mentor is actually he's just blowing up kind of big right now. Mike McClure Jr., who's from Birmingham, Alabama.
Mhm.
And so like I spent literally 2 decades climbing those ranks, asking questions, and I always tell people I was a believer on credit, and ultimately, I was believing God by faith. There were things that I had a lot of questions about. There were things that I was definitely unsure about. A lot of things that I was like, this can't be right, but I'm
Yeah.
going to believe God by faith. And I'm
Yeah.
going to trust that someday one of my mentors is going to be able to sit me down and be able to answer some of these tough questions. And again, I had some mentors who were quote unquote high up in the rank. And no matter how high up I went, I couldn't find anybody who had even really wrestled with some of the questions that I
Hmm.
had. And that became very discouraging and concerning for me, because it's like, wait a minute, we're getting up every Sunday and we're saying we know beyond a shadow of a doubt, we know for a fact that this is the truth and that God is real and all this other stuff. And it's not. It's one thing to say we believe it, but we're getting up and announcing that we
Yeah.
know for a fact, and then to find out that no, you didn't even try to know for a fact. You
Yeah.
never even wrestled with the question. And as much as I wanted to be mad at my mentors, I realized like, dang, you did the same thing I did because I took your word for it. I because you said you knew, and these other ones said they knew, and Big Mama said she knew. I figured because everybody's saying they know, one of these folks done the work and found out for sure. And it turns out like no, nobody has. Everybody's playing the same telephone game. And
Yeah.
so I kind of knew then that it was going to be a slippery slope for me. And then also just seeing because I fully deconverted during the Trayvon Martin and Mike Brown situation. Started with Trayvon, ended with Mike, because it was the straw that broke the camel's back, if you will, for me,
Mhm.
was realizing that my church, my community, as the black church, the black community, we had become more propaganda than power. And
Mhm.
it absolutely tore my heart apart seeing how many pastors, when Trayvon was ultimately, assassinated, how many pastors who came out and put the hoodies on, had the Skittles and the tea, and preached whole 3 and 4 week series on it, and then for it to fade away and nothing happened after
Yeah.
that. And then Mike Brown came around and we did the same thing. We all had these hands up, don't shoot messages. We all had the photos, all the pastors blacked out all over the place.
Yeah.
And then after that happened 2 times in a row for me, I realized like, oh no, this is a photo op.
Mhm.
These people who I consider my contemporaries and my mentors have absolutely no intentions of actually getting involved in the social necessities that are necessary to create any type of infrastructural change to actually protect Black lives. And then there, as a sociologist, I realized I had to wrestle with the history of the Black church, and a lot of things unraveled for me there. Because then I realized, Darante, this ain't nothing different than what they did in the 60s. It's nothing different than what they did in the 20s. The Black church, our church, has always been the last to get on the bandwagon for justice. And every time they had to be begged and bribed to do so, which is
Yeah.
why when we actually look at our movements, when we actually look at our movements, every single one of them are led by secular humanists. Every single one, like even when you're looking at Malcolm, who we know still believe was some type of theist, he still believed in Allah. Malcolm made the conscious decision that, hey, if we're going to do something for our communities, we're going to have to check our religions at the door. Like that's your secular humanism that's speaking at that moment.
Yeah.
That say, I got to be willing to put people above any of this other stuff. And that was
Hmm.
really my moment. Like part of my last prayer to God was, I will never, ever again put a doctrine, a dogma, or a deity over the very real needs of people that I can see in real time. And as
Yeah.
much as I was angry at my mentors and my contemporaries for just kind of playing the propaganda game, I realized that that's part of what this doctrine does. It domesticates you to a point where you think you're doing the right thing. You think you're doing what's best while you're absolutely doing nothing. It's like a dog who's begging for food and he's thinking that's the most he can do to ever get food. The most he can do is to beg, when on the inside of him, there's actually a hunter. There's
Yeah.
actually somebody who can go out there and get their own food. But when you've been domesticated in such a way, you become so afraid of biting the hand that feeds you that you spend your whole life begging and pretending. And that really the reason that dogs are kind of like that is because we've domesticated them to the point out of maturity. And so they
Hmm.
don't really grow into that full pup phase or that full dog phase, that full mature phase. They stay in that kind of pup phase. And I realized that's what church was doing to a lot of people. That a lot
Hmm.
of my friends, they had best intentions, but they weren't trying to think deeper than the 7th grader to get any real solutions.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that what Bridge City was born out of?
Yes.
So so
Oh,
tell us
man.
about Bridge City.
Yes. Okay. So me deconverting was major. Obviously, I'd spent my whole life in ministry. I've been a part of ministry since I was 11 years old. Like trying to figure out who I'd be and what I'd do after that, and actually just who I was, period, right?
Hmm.
Because at that moment, I had to wrestle with how much of these past 2 decades was me, and how much of these past 2 decades was this religion, or was this God, or this Jesus, or the words of Jesus, or the words of Paul, for that matter. How
Yeah.
much of this was me, or how much of this was that stuff there. And I finally realized, it took me a while, but I finally realized, oh, it was all me. It was all me. Everything I clung to because it resonated with something in me. And the reason I've gotten to this point in my life is because this is just a part of my journey. And
Yeah.
so I started telling people, I said, you know what I realized is that I was a preacher before I was a Christian. I was a preacher before I got saved. This is a part of my personality. When I sit
Yeah.
down and I talk to my great aunts and my cousins and stuff, and they tell me about who I was when I was 6 and 7 years old, I'm like, oh no, so this has always just been me. Preaching just looked like that thing that allowed me to be the freest version of me. And that's why I gravitated towards. And so I realized, like, no, I don't have to give up this part of me.
Hmm.
Pastoring, that's not something church gave me. I did
Hmm.
that because I love people. And I've been in it for so long. That's what I'm trying to get the secular community to realize. I've been in it for so long that I realize most people who are attached to ministry, most people who are serving in their churches, they're not doing so because they love God so much. That's the script. They're doing so because they have a passion for people. They're
Yeah.
doing so because there's lives that they want to touch and that they want to transform. And then I
Yeah.
realized, like, man, church, especially if you got a semi good one, it's one of the only places you can go where someone is going to hug you. It's one of the
Hmm.
only places you can go where someone is going to ask you how you're doing and actually be willing to sit there for a little bit and listen with you and everything. It's the
Yeah.
only place you can really go right now. Where if you are struggling with something, you feel vulnerable enough to share it with somebody in your community.
Yeah.
And so what I started realizing is that people who were deconstructing, And people who were deconverting were either being thrown into isolation or thrown to the wolves, right? And
Mhm.
so thrown to the wolves, especially our people, I saw so many deconverting, wrestling with their Christian faith, either turning to the Nation of Islam or turning to Hebrew Israelites or turning to some other thing because you're trying to fill that void. And then there are so many ravenous wolves out there who are ready to take advantage and definitely ready to get your money and
Yeah.
not do anything in return with it. But then on the other side, you have those who are, they're quick enough to kind of navigate through that and say, nah, this is bull, this is bull, this is bull. All right, I think I'm gonna stay away from all y'all. And then they just have nothing, right?
Yeah.
And it's just like what happened, like you said, you used to do a lot in the church. And so
Mhm.
you go from this point where, man, I used to sing in the choir. Where do I sing now? Man, I
Yeah.
used to help with the publications. Whose publications can I help with now? And it wasn't I was just doing these things because I just like to do these things. I was doing these things because I felt that they made a difference. They
Mhm.
were special. And so I realized there's no reason we have to rob people of that. And so this was a part of me staying in the closet as an atheist for 10 years. I decided to kind of sit back, watch, and start planning and start imagining what would secular church look like? What would a secular community look like? What
Mhm.
would be the benefits of this? Why would this matter? Why is this necessary? And the more I went down that rabbit trail, I found more and more people who that was their biggest cry. It's like, hey, I'm glad that I've deconverted and I don't have these
Yeah.
beliefs anymore, but I'm lonely.
Yeah.
It's a struggle. I don't have, I don't have people to hang out with. I don't have people to talk to when I'm really dealing with stuff. So
Mhm.
not only did you take my imaginary friend, which was the only therapy I had, or part of
Mhm.
the only therapy I had, but you also took the community that I had
Mhm.
with that as well. So even when the stuff wasn't the truth, it at least made me feel better. Even
Mhm.
when the stuff wasn't helpful, it was just nice to have other people to share it with.
Mhm.
And these are all very human experiences that we've kind of robbed ourselves of, or at least that's what we wrestle with when we deconvert. And so I hear so many people saying, I need community, I miss community. And then I'm starting to try to help people see what it is that they missed,
Mhm.
because many people in the secular community have never been churched before. So they have all of these preconceived notions of
Mhm.
just everybody's in there drinking the Kool-Aid. And while yes, all of us are taking some sips for sure, by far and large, church has already become an increasingly secular organization. The
Mhm.
majority of things that churches do today, they do for the people, not because the Bible tells them to. This is why
Mhm.
churches start switching over from choirs to praise and worship teams. There
Yeah.
was no scripture that said that. The Spirit of the Lord didn't come down and say,
Yeah.
do this. They realized that that was a difference that was happening. This is
Mhm.
why churches start going to the screens on the walls. You know what I'm saying? And people had a fit. Oh, so now they ain't got to bring their Bibles no more. Got the
Yeah.
Bibles on the screen. But like, there's no scripture that ever said bring a Bible to church. There's no scripture that ever say you couldn't have screens on there. These are secular decisions. These are
Yeah.
decisions some pastor's making because he's thinking, hey, what's going to help this moment really hit for these people? What's going to make
Mhm.
this most effective? And so I realized that's what's missing in the secular community. In the secular community right now, we don't have organizations yet. That's what we're working on. And I'll take that back. We do have a few. There's a Sunday Assembly out there that's doing this work. There's Oasis that's doing this work. Excuse me. But by far and large, we don't have many organizations that are simply committed to paying attention to what people need and meeting that. And
Mhm.
ultimately, that's what churches have become. Churches have become these community centers that are taking the temperature of the people who are members of those centers and saying, what do you want? And this is why you have some churches who are these like pop star churches. And then you still have other churches that are mom and pop churches, because all of those churches are defined by the members. They're defined by the
Yeah.
culture of the members. And I just have this sneaky suspicion that if we can get a few secular folk excited about just making people feel special, about creating conversations around personal growth and community development, around creating opportunities for people to take the things that they love to do and plug them into community. I have a sneaky suspicion that we can change like like literally state by state, city by city. We could change this nation and maybe even the globe, because
Mhm.
that's how easy it is. We just need people who care enough to start meeting weekly and putting your time where your mouth is, and
Yeah.
that's all community is. That's like, I mean, when you think about when we were in the church world, regardless of how much we loved Jesus, it didn't really mean anything if you were active in ministry, if you were an active in ministry, if you weren't the type of person who was showing up and using that to serve people in some type of way.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm charging the secular community with. That's what Bridge City exists to do, is to say, okay, let's take all this logical and critical thinking that we have. Let's take all of this science. Let's take all of this know better and do better with it. We got
Mhm.
all of this know better. Let's do better with it. And
Yeah.
let's actually invest that into creating spaces. If the people are saying, I feel isolated, I need community, then we need to be building community. And that's
Mhm.
that's what the bridge exists to do, to help people, not only to help people find that community, but to help people who are passionate about doing that work, to help them find the support they need to start those local communities where they are as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. And you were talking about, you were trying to figure out if that was really you
Mhm.
or and that's kind of how I feel when people ask me, they're like, "What made you just start this podcast?" And it because I miss talking to people.
Yes.
I was doing jail ministry
Man.
and doing teaching Bible study and so this is just kind of my outlet. This is my outreach
Yes.
and that's it just was as I tell people, it's like, well, I did this as a Christian. Now I'm doing this as whatever I am now. Like,
Yes, yes. Yeah, it's like it's still me, it's
yeah,
still me. I
yeah.
I got some different attachments now, but it is still
It's
me,
still me. That's who I
Yes.
am, and I miss singing. I
Yes.
do, and I had Mandisa Thomas with
Yes.
Black Nonbelievers, and I
Mhm.
interviewed her. Her interview should have already been uploaded, but I've been sick and I've had a whole lot going on. I haven't had
Oh,
opportunity to get
man.
it edited and up yet. But she told me to try out for the Godless
Godless
Gospel.
gospel. Yes. Yes.
Yes,
I
yeah,
absolutely love that they're doing that work, and I'm hoping more people jump on stuff like that because that's necessary, man.
yeah,
And it's beautiful.
yeah.
Like you said, it's something that we miss. I tell my kids to this day, I still enjoy gospel music, not necessarily
Mhm.
because of the lyrics. I said because it's just a reminder to me that this was one of the only places where we did people music, where
Yeah,
people just sang together. You know what I'm
yeah,
saying? It
yeah,
it
yeah.
wasn't necessarily about a specific rock star. We all felt like we were a part of it, whether you was in the
Mhm,
band, in the choir, in the front
mhm.
singers, on the dance team, whatever. It was just like, oh, and I miss, as an artist and a performer, I miss that almost more than
Yeah,
anything. I miss
yeah,
those musical moments. It was
yeah.
therapeutic for me.
Well, you still have an outlet to sing though. You sing
Yes.
on
Yeah.
Sunday mornings.
Well, interestingly enough, like music has always been a major plan for Bridge City, right?
Mhm.
Um, but I was very timid about it because people had already expressed their disinterest in the fact that Bridge City looked a lot like church.
Like
And
church,
so,
yeah.
yeah, and so I was like, I was trying to make it not look too much like church. And I'm like, bro, if you start singing on Sundays, that's gonna like
Mhm.
tip it right on over. And so I really didn't want to do that. But I
Yeah.
went to an event, Recovering from Religion, their fall excursion, and they had a songwriting session. And I wasn't actually planning on attending the session.
Mhm.
But I ended up in there anyway, and I ended up being very incredible. It was like a whole bunch of people in there, and the lady, Shelly Siegel, she's playing the guitar. And she's just like, all right, y'all tell me what words y'all are hearing. And I'm like, oh, this feels like an old school praise and worship session. Cause this is what I used to
Yeah.
do when I led praise and worship, and everybody's throwing out these lyrics, and we ended up writing this amazing love song, like a breakup song with God. And it was
Yeah.
just like, it was like beautiful, and watching people have these strong emotional reactions to this
Mhm.
moment, and watching people contribute. It's just like, no, Durante, forget them. They may say it looks like church, they just don't understand that church looks like community, because
Yeah.
that's all that this is. This is community, and we had just done it in that space, and it was beautiful. And so on the plane ride home, I started back writing music.
Mhm.
And I wrote the song that it's my outro on some of the videos, but I was living my life in the servitude of misunderstandings of people I love. Given it all, it was never enough. Because of the fall, I was never enough. I moved on from their misunderstandings. And I wrote that song and I said, okay, you know what? From now on, when I can, I'm gonna squeeze in some music. And it's actually become one of the more popular parts of our segment, which
Mhm.
of our Sunday sessions, which I'm not surprised by because again, music has always been a major part of the plan. Um, I just never had any intentions of starting the music part this early, and I never had any intentions of being the one doing the singing. Now
Yeah.
again, I love to sing, but I do have that pastor stuff still on me. Well, I just want to come up every now and then. I don't want to lead the whole song. I want y'all to already be killing it, and then I just come up and throw my little 2 cents in, and then go
Yeah.
sit my behind back down.
Yeah, yeah. That's the pastor in you.
Yes. Oh man.
Yeah. So tell me, you told me when you started deconverting, but
Mhm.
tell me how it started, like how like a little bit of the
Whew.
process of that.
Okay, yeah. So for me, it was definitely it had been cooking for a very long time. So I tell people the reason I call myself that I was a Christian on credit is because when I was a younger child, before 11, before I had ever got introduced to a Pentecostal church, I didn't believe in God.
Mhm.
I was an atheist as a young child. They just did
Until what age?
until about 11 years old.
Mhm.
I actually started believing in God and started preaching within the same week. And
So
that was
so I'm sorry
yes.
to cut you off,
No,
but
go ahead.
so when you say that you were an atheist till you were 11, like, so does that mean you had not been introduced to God or
Mm-mm. My family was semi-religious. I call them culturally religious. They were my
Mhm.
mom's side was Baptist, National Baptist, and my dad's side was American Methodist Episcopal.
Okay.
So I had been to all of their churches, but when I had sat through their services, they all talked about a God who performed in the past, and he did these things in the Bible, and they would even use that language, the Bible days.
Mhm.
And then I had a hyper religious aunt who made me write the Old Testament when I got in trouble. So I'd have to write, okay, you gotta go write the book of Genesis. All right, now you got to go write the book of Exodus.
Mhm.
So reading through those things while writing it, the language was no different than the language of stuff like Hercules or stories of Xena. And
Mhm.
so it was just kind of clear to me that, hey, this seems kind of mythological.
Mhm.
And then it was around the same time I'm realizing, okay, these people also say Santa's real. They also say the tooth fairy's real, the Easter bunny. They say the
Yeah.
groundhog predicts the weather and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I had like by the time I was like 5 and 6, and also my mother was a drug addict and life was really rough.
Mm.
So I was like,
Mm.
there can't be a God in this world, you know. So
Yeah.
God, it did nothing to hear about the love of God at these Baptist and AME churches and this God who protects and sustains and give peace beyond understanding. And I'm like,
Mhm.
nah, bro, my mom's a drug addict. That's not how that's going down.
Yeah.
They're talking about this God who would never forsake you. And I'm like, mm-mm. And then the only time they talk about this God as powerful again is just this is what he did in the past. And it's like, but he's not doing none of this today. So,
Mhm.
but when I went to a little Pentecostal church, because my mom ended up getting saved at a Pentecostal church, that's when I saw adults who behaved as if they really believed this God was real.
Yeah.
My granny, who's actually my great aunt, but she never behaved like she
Mhm.
believed God was real. Like when she was in church, she hallelujah, thank you, and all of that. But when she would get in the country, like that preacher ain't getting my money. She never behaved like
Yeah.
she was an actual believer.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like when she got sick, she wasn't going to call the preacher to pray for her.
Mhm.
It wasn't that type of situation. But at that little Pentecostal holiness church, they talked about a God who didn't stop doing stuff in the Bible days, but this God is still moving. He's still
Mhm.
shutting the mouths of the lions. He's still parting the Red Sea. He's still raising the dead and healing the sick. And these people, these adults, and this is around when I'm 11 years old, these
Mhm.
adults, they seem to believe it so much that it's moving them to run around the church. It's moving them to lay hands on people. It's moving them
Yeah.
to speak in tongues. And people are saying that's the power of God that's moving them. See, at my granny's church, they said if you walked across the pulpit, the power of God would strike you down if you're a kid. That never happened. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So it was easy not to believe in their God. But at that Pentecostal church, they said the power of God will hit you and make you start dancing. And I saw that happen
Yeah.
a lot in that church.
Yeah.
They said the power of God will make you fall out. And I saw that happen a lot at the church. And they said
Yeah.
the power of God can cast out devils. And then they cast devils out of my mom. And when they cast the devils out of my mom, I was like, okay, so God is real and God is a deliverer. And I
Mhm.
bought in hook, line, sinker that night. If this God is powerful enough to deliver my mom, then
Yeah.
I owe him my life, you know?
Yeah.
And so it was, and so that's how that transition into that kind of
Mhm.
happened. And that's why I say I was a
Mhm.
believer on faith. I still didn't believe everything about the Bible was accurate, but I thought that was my weakness. That what God needed from me was my faith. That my weakness would be that he'd make himself strong in me. That if I just
Mhm.
have faith, that even though I don't understand it, even though I don't get how this happens, I'm gonna have faith that as long as I keep serving God, soon I'll be worthy enough for him to
Yeah.
reveal to me that understanding. But I really got
Mhm.
it. He's already done me a solid by delivering my mom from these demons. So now I
Yeah.
gotta serve him. And
Mhm.
so that's how I came in, and I just kind of had to share that to give the deconstruction process, right?
Mhm.
Because that church was in revival, and at the end of that revival, my mom kicked me out of the house. So the same mom, and again, I'm 11 years old at this time. The same mom that I saw the demons cast out of, apparently they
Yeah.
came back by the end of that week.
Wow.
Um, she had asked me, and it wasn't something that was odd. She just asked me to go up to someone else's apartment and buy her some bootleg liquor with a little bit of money. And I had done it plenty of times before, but that night I felt like something was telling me don't do it. There was a lady in the
Mhm.
church, a lady who went to the church that lived in the same apartment complex. So I stopped by her house and I said, "Hey, I feel like something's telling me not to do this." And she said, "That's the Lord. That's God." And so I took the money back to my mom and I said, "Hey, mom, I can't do it. God told me that I can't do that." And so nothing happened. I went to sleep, woke up the next morning. She had my bags packed, and she said, "You're either going to serve me or you're going to serve the Lord."
Oh,
And the irony of this is that I never saw this until I deconstructed. But that night, I chose to serve the Lord.
wow.
And the irony of it is, I had chose to serve the Lord because this power was demonstrated that
Yeah.
delivered my mom from
Yeah.
the demons. And
Yeah.
here these demons were back. And instead of me realizing that, no, this was a placebo effect and that what you thought happened didn't happen, I used this moment radicalized my faith that this is the devil testing my new faith because he
Mm.
knows that my mom is something that I hold precious. So this is
Wow.
almost like God asking me to make the sacrifice between my own son. If you truly love me, you said you love me. Now, will you sacrifice this relationship with your mother for me? The person who you
Wow.
came to me for. It radicalized my faith, made me feel like I was super anointed, that I was doing super good for God, even though I had to spend the next few weeks homeless. And that became pretty much standard for my
Mhm.
relationship with Christianity. Even as I continued to rise through the ranks, that became my standard. Um, Even that night, I walked to one of the preacher's house because old Pentecostal holiness churches had like 11 ministers in one church, and so I went to one of the ministers' house who fostered kids, and I told him what had happened, and he just basically said, "I'll pray for you," and I was still homeless that night. And
You were
that was
11?
11, yes. And you would think this story would have happened in New York or DC, and this is no, this is right here in little old country Alabama. And it's funny because my story isn't necessarily unique. I'm likely a dime of dozen, especially in this area. It happens so often.
Mm.
Um, and it actually, I remember the conversation. The conversation was, you disrespected your mother for not doing what she asked you to do, and this is why
To
you're
go buy her some
experiencing
booze
this.
at the bootlegger.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And of course, like I had bought in hook, line, and sinker. So like I couldn't abide by that. Like, no, there's no way God would want me to do that. And his thing was, no, well, the Bible says you got to honor your parents. And I was like, I see now I'm confused.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I ended up moving in with my dad after that, who lived in DC. So I got moved up to DC, and I stayed in the faith, stayed radicalized, in school, starting campus ministries, started
Was your
praying for
dad in
people.
church? Was he going
He
to
was
church
not.
regularly? Oh, okay.
Not at all. My dad's a different type of guy. He is a Christian. He's a Christian,
Uh-huh.
like, and he will find like a little storefront church every now and then that he'll just choose to tithe to. And
Mm.
I don't know why.
Yeah.
It's always a woman led church, and so I always wondered if he's sleeping with the pastor, because my dad is that type of guy. You know what I'm saying? And he gets it from his dad. Like my granddad has like 38 kids, so
Oh
uh,
my.
it's crazy. But no, like he was actually a little weirded out by my faith, especially when I
Mm.
asked him if I could buy some olive oil at the store, and he's like,
Yeah.
what do you need that for?" And he's like, I'm going to use this for my prayer, when I pray and stuff.
Mhm.
And I just remember the look he gave me, and he was just like, "Man," my dad was like an athlete and a ladies' man type of thing,
Uh-huh.
he's and he's still just getting to know me at this time as well. And I'm just this bright skinned little chubby kid that
Yeah.
wants olive oil to pray. Um, and it wasn't, but it wasn't too odd because DC was different. And so
Mhm.
which was beautiful for me, in Dothan where I grew up. It's like all the black people were the same. So we all listen to the same music, we all dress kind
Mhm.
of the same, we all,
Mhm.
watch the same movies. And then when I moved to DC, there was so many different spices and flavor of black.
Yeah.
That my dad, he had been up there since he was like 19 or so. But he had been up there so long that he was so used to different flavors of black that he was just like, "Oh, you must be one of them." And it was just kind of like that.
Mhm.
But and which it was kind of cool for me because he and I never got close. So I was just glad that he kind of left it at that. But
Mm.
I stayed active in ministry. Actually, I had been preaching since I was 10. I'm sorry, 11. Yeah, 11. I'd been preaching since I was 11. My family, nobody in my family had never heard me preach
Mhm.
until I started my own church. And I mean, when I say had been preaching since 11, from 11 to 17, I had only preached on school campuses.
Yeah.
But it led like literal revivals. From 17 through 2021, I'm
Mhm.
preaching all over Alabama, Florida, and Georgia, and not
Wow.
one person in my family had ever seen me preach until I actually started my second church. Uh,
Mhm.
my second church was the first time my mom had saw me preach. It was the first time my grandmother had saw me preach. The first time
Yeah.
anybody in my family had ever seen me preach. That's how disconnected I was
Mhm.
with most of my family. Which again, a lot of this stuff played a part into my struggles with the faith. Because again, when you asked me earlier if my family were Christian, I'm like, yeah, they were Christian, but they were offended by my commitment to ministry. I was the
Mm.
first person in my family who had ever joined the ministry.
Yeah.
Nobody prior to me, and my whole family are Christians. My whole family are believers. As a matter of fact, when I told my father that I wanted to go to Bible college, he claimed that was the reason he didn't pay for my college. He wasn't going to pay for college anyway, but he claimed, that was
Yeah.
the reason. This was such an offensive thing to like literally both sides of my family. Now,
Wow.
sociologically, I realized there were other variables there, right? It wasn't necessarily just about ministry. it's almost like when you're the black sheep of the family, and I hate
Mhm.
to pull scripture here, but there's this old scripture that we used to use. It says, "A prophet is without honor in his
It
own
is on her.
hometown."
Yeah.
And it was
Yeah.
really that thing. It was like, who are you to be the one
Mhm.
that's out here doing this? Because
Yeah.
you're born to Sharon. You're Sharon's boy, and Sharon didn't get her life together. So how are you gonna be the one that's out here?
Mhm.
So it very much felt like my existence as not only a preacher, but as a preacher who was growing in influence,
Yeah.
felt like an indictment against them, you
Yeah.
know,
They wanted you
and
to be as miserable as they were,
yes,
basically. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And so I had to wrestle with a lot of that, and so I spent a lot of years, because all of these are people I've had to live with. I had to live with my dad, I had to live with my mom. Actually, I didn't move back in with her until like 18, till I was 18. But I had to live with my granny, I had to live with my great aunt. And these were all people that I did not have a very good relationship. So I spent a lot of
Wow.
time praying to God. I spent a
Mhm.
lot of time, asking God to wrap me in his arms.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time asking God, hey, can you just, the Bible says, when my mother and father forsake me, you will take me up. Well, listen,
Mhm.
man, my mother and father have forsaken me. Where are you? You know, and though I would end all of those prayers and all of those moments with nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. If you don't show
Yeah.
up tonight, God, I'll still serve you. If you don't speak a word, I'll still be here. None of
Mhm.
those moments went away. So then this is why tell people, like, I was deconstructing the whole time. I was
Mhm.
doing it, but I was still staying attached by faith. But the sting of not
Yeah.
hearing anything, when you know you're crying your heart out, those wounds don't go away.
Mhm.
I can put that smile on, I can preach through it, I can praise through it, I can worship through it, but that memory is still there. Every time you called out, not one answer came. Every time I'm preaching and I'm saying, I hear the Spirit of the Lord, I have those memories. Do you really hear the Spirit
Yeah.
of the Lord? And so it
Yeah.
was a deconstruction process for me the whole time. And then on top of that, I kept having these different moments with people. And so from the time I was in high school to the time I started my first church, my theology underwent so many shifts. When I From 11 to 17, I was staunchly, I want to say apostolic, but it's like revival apostolic. I was all about the fivefold ministry, the apostle, the prophet, evangelist, pastor, teacher. I was all
Mhm.
about living a life of holiness in order to be that vessel of anointing. I was
Mhm.
all about, you got to tithe your day to the Lord. So if you're not
Mhm.
like I had a church music group at the time. Everybody who was a part of that group had to confirm that daily they spent at least 2 hours and 45 minutes in the presence of the Lord. You got to
Wow.
tithe that day to the Lord. Like, I was very
Wow.
much that guy. You couldn't cuss around me. You couldn't smoke or anything around me. And I was bold with it, and because of my charisma and my ability to read people, I was so effective that I
Mhm.
thought it was God.
Yeah.
I could be bold and just go and say things to people, and they'd respond and they'd cry and they'd say, "Oh, that must be this or this," and then later I realized, like, "Oh no, you're just good at reading people, bro. You're just really good at that." But because of that, I'm thinking it's God, and I'm going with it, and then one day I do it, and I'm getting on this guy about him smoking a cigarette. And then, he snaps back at me and he's just like, "Why do you think this smoking a cigarette is wrong?" And I said, "Because your body is the temple of the Lord and you're damaging your body. I mean, why would you not value the life that God gave you?" And then he said, "Did you know that high blood pressure and diabetes are number one killer in the African American community?" This is some white guy, some white goth looking guy talking to me. And I'm like, "Yeah, I know, man. I know. You gonna tell me about me." And he
What you finna
says,
go home and eat?
"Right, and he says, like, I saw you eat that hot dog at lunch. You had no problem about gobbling down that hot dog. Do you know what the Bible says about pork?" And I mean, like, he's just reading me the riot act, and
Yeah.
he's doing it so smoothly that I can't feel offended. I
Yeah.
can only feel inadequate.
Yeah.
Because the first thought I had was, there's no way he should have been able to read me that quick. There's no
Mhm.
way I came at him so strong. I came at him so hard, and within two sentences, he had me completely realize that I had not thought through this stance at all, that I am just parroting what I've read in a book. And so at
Mhm.
that moment, I didn't completely deconvert, but there was another brick of
Yeah.
deconstruction where
Yeah.
I realized, and I started say this became a saying for me over the next few years of my life, that what I
Mhm.
know to be true today, tomorrow, what I know to be true today, I may know to be absolutely false tomorrow. And I need
Yeah.
to learn how to live in that humility because
Yeah.
this brother just taught me a lesson, and that from now on, if I'm going to speak on something, I need to know what I'm talking about before I do
Yeah.
it. And
Yeah.
so like that was another one of those bricks. Another one was I was leading a revival and I had invited some friends over to be a part of this revival at this other church. And one of my friends in the revival, and we're all young ministers, we're around
Mhm.
17 and 18 now. And we're at this Assemblies of God church. And my homie comes over and starts speaking in tongues to me. And I'm like, now wait a minute. And he's not like, like speaking in tongues like he's about to prophesy. He's like speaking in tongues like he and I are supposed to be having a conversation.
Mhm.
And in my mind, and I'm still speaking in tongues because I'm worshiping and I'm laying hands on folk and stuff. But I'm thinking, like, is he trying to talk to me? And am I supposed to speak in tongues back?
Yeah.
And so I do. I speak in tongues back. You know, and I'm thinking maybe if I do this by faith, that God is going to use this moment and take my tongue's interpretation to another level, and
Yeah.
then I'm actually going to hear this conversation. That's not
Yeah.
what happened. I left that conversation even more confused than when I went in. And that was another like kink for me because it was just like, whoa, I know for a fact I don't know anything he says.
Mhm.
I know for a fact I don't know anything I said, but
Mhm.
he's pretending like he
Yeah.
understood me.
Yeah.
And that was just like, because I didn't get into this to pretend.
Yeah.
I got into this because I thought this was real. I thought we were speaking this holy gibberish and only God could understand. As long as that's what we were holding that thing at, I was good. The
Yeah.
moment we start pretending to understand each other,
Mhm.
went a little too far, player. So they say you give
Mhm.
somebody an inch, a rope, they'll take or whatever. Give them an inch, they'll take
Yeah.
a mile.
Yeah.
And I was just like, oh man. And more stuff happened like that. I had a pastor that I absolutely love. Um, and this was a major shift for me because again, I was the revival type guy. And a pastor who I absolutely love, he was in the middle of preaching this amazing revival series, where throughout this whole series, he's just walking around very calmly, picking people out of the audience, laying his Bible on their heads, and then they're being healed of unverifiable diseases.
Mhm.
And we're all going just bananas. And then one week, he just dies. In the middle of this series, he goes to sleep at home and does not wake back up. He was only 50 years old. He was a health guru and all of that stuff, always on the treadmill. Like
Oh
he
my
was a good
goodness.
looking man. And he just died in the middle of this series. And I remember because I was working at Walmart overnight shift and I came
Mhm.
home and my roommate told me, Pastor David died. And I worked overnight shift. I came on, I said, okay, so we're going up to the church. And he was like, no. And I was like, why are we not going to the church? Because this is what we preach. We preach that God raises the dead. We preach that God heals the sick. And Pastor David Pizzamenti has been teaching us for the past 8 weeks that we are here for such a time as this. This is God testing our
Yeah.
faith to make sure that we practice what we preach.
Yeah.
Not one person went to raise that man up from the dead. From the moment the news hit that he was dead, everybody immediately went and started fighting over his position.
Oh my goodness.
I was horrified, still a young, well, I'm older teenager now because again, I'm 18 around this time.
Mhm.
I was horrified because it was just like this dude speaking in tongues with me. You're pretending to believe something that you don't believe.
Mhm.
And I'm shouting every Sunday because I believe this.
Mhm.
I'm crying my heart out because I believe this. I'm killing myself with sexual purity because I believe this. I believe
Yeah.
that on the other side of this there is dunamis power And you're telling me that all of the adults in here was just pretending?
Yeah.
That was hard for me. Still wasn't enough for me to deconvert. Why? Because I was a Christian on credit.
Yeah.
I was still willing to believe God by faith. That's kind of that thing that you start doing. Once you get in this hamster wheel, if you get saved in a Baptist church and you realize that they got it all wrong, you don't stop being a Christian. You go to a Methodist church. You go to
Mhm.
that Methodist church and you feel like they got it wrong, you don't stop being a Christian. You find you a Pentecostal church and you just
Mhm.
keep hopping from doctrine to doctrine to doctrine, reshaping it until you find something that is more fitting for you. And that's where that journey ended up being for me is then I realized like I want less and less to do with the Christians who make these loud, bold claims and aren't living in any way that's accommodating that. And that's when I started to wrestle with the fact maybe my understanding of this dunamis power God is misinformed. Maybe that's not how God moves, which
Mhm.
is how I ended up getting my passion for sociology. Is studying deeper behind the text is what I would have called it then, thinking I'm getting some real good revelation. But
Yeah.
I begin to see God more and more and more as basically the pinnacle of humanity, of the highest good for humanity. Even though I wasn't articulating it like that yet. I wasn't wrestling with it like that yet, but that's what I was shaving God down to. I was shaving away the God who casted out devils. I was shaving away the God who raised the dead. I was shaving away the God who healed the sick. I was even shaving away the God who required people to be filled with the Holy Spirit. I was shaving away the necessity of preaching about anything like heaven or hell because as I was desiring to have as honest as possible as a relationship with God, I didn't want to attach myself to any beliefs that weren't biblically founded and
Mhm.
did not match the character of God that I believed in, which I think a lot of Christians do. If you believe God is all loving, then we're going to find a way to make whatever story we read an
Mhm.
all loving story, or we're just going to say it doesn't mean what you think it means, or this doesn't actually matter, or
Yeah.
this is just the way they did
Mhm.
things. God didn't really
Mhm.
want that. We make
Mhm.
all of these excuses. And instead of me making the excuses, I just start shaving them away altogether and just said, you know what, we're not even going to deal with that. I got to the place where I felt like it was an honest approach to say, if I've never been to a heaven and I've never been to a hell, and after reading the Bible, I'm really unsure if these things are actually a proper part of theology, it's not right for me to stand in a pulpit and tell you what's going to get you in and what's going to get you in the other place. I
Yeah.
have nothing to stand on to say that. And so it was funny because my wife now she'll go back and look at some of my old preaching clips. And she said, by looking at these, it seems like you were already an atheist. And I said, I kind of think I was.
Mhm.
Because the day that I deconverted, I remember the conversation, it wasn't a long drawn out process for me. It was just like after having these conversations with myself, it was like I think I'm an atheist again. And
Wow.
it was deeper than that. It was like I think I've always been, and I've been trying not to be. I've been trying really, really hard. I've tried harder than most
Yeah.
not to be. But I was so honest with my faith that I couldn't help but deconstruct because
Mhm.
I wasn't satisfied with an illusion. I wasn't satisfied with anything that didn't work. That's why charismatic worked for me for so long because I could prophesy to people and get a reaction so that
Mhm.
looked like something was working.
Yeah.
The more I shaved God down to a God who had to matter to how people's lives were transformed, the less useful the Bible or the God story became altogether.
Mhm.
And then and that's what I had likely been an atheist a long time before I actually deconverted. But it was really just seeing that the stuff I'm preaching, even though I thought it was good, the more I shaved off, I was like, there's no way for me to preach this where this isn't harmful.
Yeah.
I'm telling people, on Sundays that God will make a way out of no way. You stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. Won't he do it? When I know he won't. I'm telling people that.
Mhm.
And at the same time, I'm also watching from a sociological perspective hundreds and thousands of my people lose all sense of autonomy, agency, and their own sense of authenticity because they're afraid to do something that might be against God's will. They're
Yeah.
afraid to move and might mess something up. And so we
Yeah.
just sitting there, stagnating in our own communities, just sitting there. And I realized like it's me that's
Mhm.
creating that. I'm wondering why I'm getting frustrated with some of the young men in my church because they aren't doing certain things. They aren't taking certain steps in their lives. And then I begin to look at some of the stuff I'm preaching and I'm like, yeah, D, you're preaching some good stuff that's really positive, but then you will co-sign it with something like, but don't you worry about it. Why are you trying to figure it out when God has already worked it out? You're throwing those little fluffy punchlines in there. And
Mhm.
even though you just spent 15, 20 minutes telling them the importance of paying attention, navigating, walking through things, breaking things down, when you co-sign that with, but don't worry about it because God gonna take care
Yeah.
of it, you just threw all of that out of the window.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh man. Oh man, it was so much. I know I went the long way around, but
No.
the whole journey was
Yeah.
deconstruction. Watching how some of my mentors treated people and how not only God didn't intervene, but the other believers didn't intervene.
Mhm.
It's almost like sometimes when we're watching videos um of a police officer or a group of police officers and they unalive somebody, will sometimes wonder, well, which cop is the good cop? If everybody sat there and just watched it
Yeah.
happen. I've
Yeah.
had way too many moments in church where I had to wonder which Christian is the good Christian. When I've watched just so many harmful things. I remember one time back in my youth pastor days watching a group of kids in a church who had some seniority because of who their parents were, and they were the leaders of certain dance and youth groups,
Mhm.
like literally physically assault two other children who were mixed children because
Mhm.
they did not like them, but they did this whole assault under the guise of prayer, because we're praying for you, but hitting you upside your head and punching you and pinching you because we're trying to get that devil out of you. And these are kids and they're
Yeah.
adults in the room. There are
Yeah.
adults in the room and nobody's doing
Wow.
anything. And and
Wow.
and when you have those type of memories, you have to wonder like, okay, so which ones are the good Christians? I remember
Mhm.
telling people when, especially the year that I deconverted, and it's like, why would you be so, willing to turn away? I was like, you don't understand how many families I've seen destroyed.
Mhm.
You don't know how many marriages I've seen ripped apart that are
Mhm.
all attached to people's weird associations with what's in this book.
Yeah.
You don't know how many people I've seen harm their kids because of something in this book.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you can only see that for so long. And then if you're honest, and like I said, I was trying to be honest, you can only have so many unanswered prayers yourself
Mhm.
and then turn around and hear your members dealing with the same thing.
Mhm.
And I think I shared with, I forgot who it was, but I remember having this moment where my members were coming to me saying, Pastor, why doesn't God speak to me? Why
Mhm.
doesn't God answer my prayers? And
Mhm.
these are same members who on Sunday mornings get up and say, oh, I hear the Lord speaking clearly. He's speaking to you right now. And I remember getting agitated one day thinking about that,
Yeah.
thinking, why would you fake? Why would you do that? And then it hit me for the same reason you do, Durante.
Mhm.
They're protecting that image of that relationship because that's what you're required to do. It's
Mhm.
learned behavior. They're doing it the same reason you do it. You've never heard a God speak to you, but you've heard other people use this language. So you
Mhm.
use this language because you know it's what you're supposed to use, even though it's not true. And
Yeah.
that's when I begin to realize, like, dang, the version of church that religion has given us, the version of community that religion has given us, has just given us a place to pretend, not a place to grow.
Yeah.
And I'll take that back to Bridge City. That's what Bridge City is for. We're a place for
Yeah.
people to grow without having to
That's
pretend.
right. Yeah. Yeah. That's wonderful, man, that you that like everything about Bridge City, and I've watched some of your Sunday morning sessions,
Oh
and
man.
I enjoy those. And I don't have a lot of like a lot of times I do interviews and things on Sunday 'cause, while my
Oh
husband's
yeah.
at church. I um, do other
Oh
things during that time.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So he's still involved.
yeah, yeah.
Ooh, that's cool. That's
Yeah.
cool.
He
That's
and
cool.
my 12-year-old. Yeah, my
Oh,
12-year-old, they go to
okay.
church on Sunday.
Yeah.
He's actually at the jail now. He's still doing jail ministry.
Oh man.
So,
Wow.
mhm.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
remember those days. I
Yeah.
remember those days.
Yeah, and I mean, I miss it because I enjoyed
Yes.
it.
Well, I
I
mean, like,
enjoyed it.
I think again, that's one of those things. Like, there's no reason to me that we, as secular humanists or whatever we are, there's no reason that the moment we stop being Christians or anything that we should stop
Mhm.
looking for ways to help people. And it's
Yeah,
easier when we organize, right?
yeah.
Sure, you could just be like, well, I'm just going to go and do it myself. That's taxing. That's hard.
Mhm.
But if we
Yeah.
actually build communities, then it makes it easier for other people to do
Mhm.
it.
Mhm.
It makes it, that's why churches can get in places so easily because they have a community of support that
Yep.
makes it
That's
easier.
right.
You know what I'm
That's
saying?
right. Yeah. Yeah, and I'm thankfully I'm still part of an organization
Yes.
where I get to help people and do things,
That's
because
beautiful.
that's part of who I am. So
Yes.
I have to do that.
Man. See, all the good people been hiding in church. That's the problem. That's the problem.
Yeah. Well, man, I love your story. I love your story. Like, I saw it popped up on my phone the other day. Was You were just on Myth Vision the other day,
Oh,
right?
yes. Yes.
And I said I can't watch it till after I talk to you because I didn't want that to influence the
Oh, man.
conversation.
Yes.
So now
Yes.
tonight I can watch it.
Oh, that is awesome.
Yeah,
Yes,
and
yes.
I felt privileged too. I was like, he's on Myth Vision this week, and I get to interview him too.
Yeah, like as soon as you mentioned it, I was like, yeah, like number one, anybody that's in our community, that's easy for me. Like I like that's just no, that's what we exist for. And then I'm
Yeah.
working with Chris Mallard of the Daily Atheist Morning Network to actually help other content creators find their space, find their flow. He's actually
Mhm.
been doing some script writing classes, video editing classes, and stuff like that because
Yeah.
that's another part of that community aspect. If we know there are a bunch of us out here who are trying to use our platforms to get these messages out, tell these stories, and create space for folk, then there's no reason that we can't work together to help each other, get it
Mhm.
done. And
Yeah.
that's one of the things that has been beautiful. And so I'm excited about what's to come. The more and more we
Yeah.
have people working together, and that's why anytime someone in our community is like, I'm doing something, if I have the time, I want to support it because
Yeah.
I want to make sure I'm modeling that at every step of the way.
Yeah. Oh, I appreciate that. I do. I appreciate that. It's not,
Yes,
not everybody's like that, because
that is true.
you're growing, you're growing, you're an author and you got all kinds of stuff going on, people starting to know you but you still take time for us little people. I appreciate
Oh man, there are no little people, only little minds, man. Like
that.
and even little minds can be developed. No, no, like
Absolutely.
man, I'm people centric, right?
Mhm.
And it's funny because I'm not necessarily an extrovert. So when people see me on video and stuff, they're like, "Oh man, he's probably the coolest person to hang out in the world." And I'm like, "Nah, I'm actually kind of boring." Because like as soon as I get off here, I'm going right back to work. I'm like, this is like work is what drives me right now. And
Mhm.
that's a part of just being an ambitious person, which I do realize like when I was a pastor, I had put a lock on that because I was
Yeah.
so afraid of pride. I was so afraid of ego. I was so afraid of, becoming arrogant or
Mhm.
leaning into my own understanding. But ever since I've kind of let all of that go, like I have ugh, and
Yeah.
so, but no, like I am like people centered. I absolutely love people. I want people to be able to see their value, to trust their value, and to not dim their light on account of anybody else,
Mhm.
because at the end of the day, we're all just people, you know.
Mhm.
And when I see another person doing something great, I used to say, preacher talk, when God is blessing my neighbor, I'm not mad because that means he's in my neighborhood.
Right.
You
He's in
know
your
what I'm saying?
neighborhood. Yeah.
But now like I tell my kids all the time, people can do what people. So
Mhm.
anytime I see any person do anything, it is always encouraging. Anytime I see anybody who's like, just, kicking butts, taking names, doing whatever, it's encouraging me because I'm always like, no, if they can do that, I can
Yeah.
do that. It may
Yeah.
take me a little longer. I might have to do some things different, but if
Yeah.
if one person can do it, other people can do it. And so, nope, I don't have those. I just don't have those hangups of, oh, well, they don't have as many subscribers as me. I'm not going on their channel. That's weird to me.
Yeah.
Now I do have some hangups. I would like my hangups. I'm gonna be honest. I think you're probably the first person I've ever said this. So this is an exclusive. You're getting a scoop.
Oh, okay. All
I
right.
do have some weird hangups. Like if someone asks me to be on their show and I've never seen their name before, I'm likely not going to respond to that. And that's just
Mhm.
because I am super busy.
Mhm.
But if I've seen your name in my comments, if I've seen your name in my Discord, to me, if I have the time, I can make that because that's somebody who's supporting me. And that's
Mhm.
one thing that, like, again, after deconverting, like balance means something to me. And it's
Yeah.
like that, look, if someone's adding value to me, no, I'm gonna
Mhm.
make time for them. It would be stupid for me
Mhm.
not to. That's just good math. That's how you build
Yeah.
a solid relationship. So for those
Yeah.
anybody's watching and saying,
Yeah.
I've reached out to him and he never responded. That's why.
That's
Comment
why.
under my stuff or join my Discord. Otherwise, if you're a stranger, I'm gonna treat you like a stranger. But
Yeah.
don't be a
Well, I
stranger.
appreciate you. Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Was there number two?
No, that's really
There's just the
well,
one? Okay.
that's really the one. Like the other one, it's not necessarily about invites. I do get people, and again, I've never said this one before, but I do get people who message me a lot, and they'll just say, "Hey," or they'll just send me some random Facebook meme. I'm
Yeah.
never going to respond to those. A part
Yeah.
of that is my neurospicy. If I don't know what you want, I'm not allowing myself to get trapped into a conversation with you.
Yes.
If you want my attention, you have to tell me what you want in advance.
Right.
And
Right.
typically, what I do, as long as you reach out and say, "Hey, Durante, I saw this. I had a question about this. I'm going to look at it and I'm going to try to prioritize in my head. When can I get back to that?" And I'm going to be thinking about that answer. And as soon as I get a chance, most people know I'm going to send you a voice message and I'll just be like, "Hey, man, thank you for doing this, blah, blah, blah." And I'm going to give you that answer. But if you just say, "Hey," that hey is going to sit on unread. It might sit on red. You might see
Yeah.
my little head drop down there and just look at it because I'm going to treat you like old folks treat you. Oh, you didn't want nothing. If you wanted
Right.
something, you would have said something.
It was. Right. Right. Like my daughter just texted me mom a few minutes ago. Like, I
Yes.
take that.
Like,
I
where's the
take
rest of the
that.
sentence, man?
What what is it? Are you on fire? Are you sick?
Yes.
Like, what is it?
And
Don't just
that's what it
mom me.
is. If I had to tell my family members that because they had the hardest time kind of getting that from me. It's just like, hey, you can't just text message me and just say, "Hey, call me." Like you have
Yeah.
to tell me what you want because like my mind is going to entertain 1,000 possibilities.
Yeah.
This could be an emergency. Somebody could be, getting assaulted. You could need $1,000. You could need bail money. Like there's so
Right.
many different. I want to know what I'm getting into before I get emotionally invested.
Ah, I have one more question for you.
Yes.
How did your family react to your deconversion?
Okay. So, all right. Well, my deconversion was a hot mess for a few reasons
Mhm.
because, of course, I was a pastor of a church that I had started from the ground up. I was also married to someone different at the time. And so when I deconverted, I left my church and my marriage. And so my family is filled with a lot of single women who
Mhm.
have gone through divorce.
Mhm.
Um, some of those divorces have been based on infidelity, and some of those divorces have been based on just flat out neglect, just somebody getting up, leaving, and never coming back.
Mhm.
Me making the decision to divorce my wife was a scar that was a little too deep for most of the women in my family. So even before they found out that I was no longer a Christian, just finding out the fact that I was a pastor who was divorcing his wife was enough for them to,
Yeah.
well, just dislike me as much as they had already disliked me. It didn't really change. It's just like
Right.
now
Now it's
it's
more.
like, yeah, it's a different thing, you know?
Yeah.
And so, as a matter of fact, my grandmother, my father's mother, had never visited my house the entire time that I had been living, never visited my house. And the week after I moved out, her and all my aunties were at my ex-wife's house,
Mm.
which was my former house, talking about me like just a little old dog. And by this time, I didn't care because I had detached from so much by this time, that I was finally becoming a healthier version of me, where I didn't live under the shadow of their expectations anymore.
Mhm.
As a matter of fact, and I'm not necessarily proud of this, but this was a kind of a growing moment. I called and cussed my grandmother the heck out. I told her exactly how I felt. I said,
Mhm.
"How dare you even have an opinion on my life?" And I read her the riot act. I read her through
Yeah.
everything I remembered about her
Mhm.
life and just said, "Hey, I didn't cheat on my wife. I didn't, I did not leave my family abandoned or anything like that. I said I
Yeah.
made sure everybody was taken care of, and I made the decision to part ways and to make sure that I was still taking care of my kids, which I have full custody of to this day."
Mhm.
So I decided not to tell them about the atheist thing, that part.
Mhm.
They were very upset about that. I did get remarried rather quickly, which I told people that I would. I reminded people I didn't get divorced because I didn't want to get married, because I didn't want to be married. I got divorced because I was married to somebody who didn't want to be married, and I
Mhm.
wasn't going to pretend that that wasn't the case
Right.
for any more longer. Once I
So
stopped
once you
lying to myself,
yeah,
yes,
yeah. So basically you were probably staying in it because you were a Christian and
that's
you
it.
felt
I
like
was
you
a,
were
I
supposed to
was a
be.
believer. I was
Yeah.
a believer, and I had heard all of these horror stories about how divorce cripples your children.
Mm.
And that was like my biggest concern. Is like, oh man, like I can't have my boys crippled. That's like they were becoming my reason for existence.
Mhm.
And but it was them that kind of gave me the strength to make that decision, because I remember like, oh no, I don't want them to think this is a healthy relationship. I don't want them to
Yeah.
think this is a healthy partnership. I don't want
Mhm.
them to strive for this. And so I'd rather for us to learn how to teach them how to separate from unhealthy stuff, before
Yeah.
it hurts anybody else. And
Mhm.
and I did. And then I moved to back to DC. The plan was at the time was that I'd move up there and get better employment because I wasn't making very much as a pastor. That
Mhm.
I'd get better employment. I just graduated college, and then we'd split the boys down the year because we'd homeschool. That changed as soon as I left, and we spent the next few years in court fighting over custody. And so I ended up
Um,
I only lived in DC for 3 months,
mhm.
because when I came back for the divorce hearing, it was basically she's trying to claim full custody, and you can't get partial custody if you're not in the state. So I moved back to Alabama.
Oh, okay.
And then I had to keep my atheism in the closet a little while longer. While I
Mhm.
was in DC, I was letting everybody know, yeah, I don't believe in God no more. And then I had to
Yeah,
move back to
yeah.
Alabama, and the only job I could find in Alabama that would pay me anywhere decent was in the church. And so I
Mhm.
took a job with my mentor, who did know that I was deconverting and
Mhm.
also knew that I was shacking at the time, but still put me on the staff, because I was one heck of a preacher and I'm a people person.
Wow.
Like, so I built when I
Wow.
come into a church, I'm gonna build teams. And he was just like, "We're gonna tell everybody she's your wife." He literally said this. We're just gonna
Oh,
tell everybody she's
wow.
your wife. And I'm sure I wasn't the first person he had done this with.
Oh my
And
goodness.
I stayed at that church for about 6 months. I ended up resigning because I realized like I didn't want to work with people who could change their minds about what they were going to do just based off of the voice in their head. I
Mhm.
needed to be in a situation where we got a contract that says how much you're going to pay me
Yeah,
and when you're going to pay me,
yeah.
because I have a family and I'm fighting a legal battle right now, so I don't need these games.
Mhm.
My family found out that I was an atheist about 6 months later. After I resigned from that church, I started working for the Southern Baptist Convention. I
Hmm.
got voted in historically as the first African American director that this particular association of them had in their existence, which was over
Wow.
150 years. Um, Beautiful situation at first. People were enamored by me. I'd preach in those Southern Baptist churches and do my little Joel Osteen and just kind of walk with the Bible and talk all
Yeah.
nice. And they were charmed. I was leading the community development programs. We had expanded. I mean, this is all in 6 months. Had expanded.
Yeah.
We had added a new thrift store. Someone had donated a 15,000 square foot building to the organization because of the work that I was doing there.
Wow.
And then I ended up sharing something on Facebook about Santa Claus.
Mhm.
And one of the other directors got very upset about that, and decided to start checking into my history a little more, and
Mm.
ended up finding out that I didn't believe in a lot of things. And so instead of having a conversation with me, I got horrendously fired. And actually, let me be clear, I'm leaving something out of this story. There was a pastor friend of mine in this same city who was also a part of this organization. That's actually how I ended up getting the job there,
Mhm.
who was sleeping with one of his members. And
Mhm.
I had warned him about this. I'd actually given him good advice too. I said, "You and your wife need to go away for a few weeks, rekindle your marriage, and you need to never
Yeah.
preach on relationships again." Well,
Mhm.
he didn't take that advice. He kept sleeping with the young lady, and her husband found out, and her husband called the organization and snitched
Mm.
on him.
Wow.
So he got very upset because he thought that I was the one that told them.
Oh, wow.
And so when he found out that this director had got wind that I didn't believe in Santa Claus, that was the slippery slope.
Mhm.
Um, he's the one that told the director that I was actually secretly an atheist and
Wow.
that I had been playing them the whole time. So
Mhm.
that director came back and fired me in a very public way. And then a week later, levied like 7 false charges against me, 4 of which were felonies that I had to fight for
Oh,
2
mm.
years. I had
Oh
to
my
fight
goodness.
for 2 years. My degree meant nothing for
Oh,
2
wow.
whole years. And while going through that, I remember calling one of my aunts who was one of the people who had helped raise me. And I was
Mhm.
crying. I was in tears. And she's like, "What's going on?" And I'm like, number one, I was offended that she asked because I already knew everybody in the family was talking about it. But we're just going to
Mhm.
pretend like we don't know. And I said, I was arrested. They kept me in there. They put me on a psych hold. I'm losing everything. I've lost my house. Me and my kids and my wife are living out of my Durango. Like, I
Wow.
don't know what's going on. And she says, "Well, what happened?" I said, "Well, they found out I don't believe in Jesus anymore. That's why they're doing this." And she said, "Well, it deserves to be happening to you."
I saw that coming. I knew that was coming.
Oh my
I knew
goodness.
that was coming. Yeah.
And
So,
those
at any point did you feel like maybe I made the wrong choice and
nope.
maybe this is never?
At that well, see, it was the same thing that had happened when I was that kid who went
Mhm.
home and my mom said,
Yeah.
"You gotta go." It
Yeah.
radicalized where I was
Yeah.
because at that
It
moment
made
I
you
was
more atheist.
yes, because it was like, "Oh no, like it's your Jesus that's doing this to me." And what you basically just said is that if Jesus approved the lynching of a black man, even if that black man is the baby boy you raised, you'd be okay with it. I want
Yeah.
nothing to do with your religion.
Yeah.
And it was like at that moment I began to understand why so much in my family was dysfunctional. I
Mhm.
began to realize like, oh, these are people who don't know how to think. These are
Mhm.
people who don't know how to engage life. And I don't mean that in any type of derogatory way.
Right.
I mean that in a sense that, and from a place of deep empathy and sadness, because if you met some of these people, you know they're brilliant and they're bright, but they have
Mhm.
robbed themselves of all types of living and all types of life. And that's what I saw is and the thing is she was the only one who vocalized those words that way other than my mother.
Mhm.
She would say things and then pull back, say things and then pull back. But the rest of the family just treated me like it didn't exist. And so they'd be around and hey, hey, they
Yeah.
basically treated me the way they used to treat my mother when she was on drugs.
Mm.
I was the drug addict of the family at that
Mhm.
moment. And so that was another reason why I just continued to kind of stay in the closet for as long as I could, because anytime I tried to tell anybody, they treated me like there was something wrong with me or that I had no right to come to these decisions. I had no right to come to
Yeah.
conclusions of my own. But then after 10 years of doing that, and then once I kind of figured out that I think I'm ready. I think I have my Bridge City stuff planned out, my Together We Can stuff planned out. I
Yeah.
think I'm ready, and I'm tired. I'm
Yeah.
tired of being alone. I'm tired of feeling isolated. I'm tired of feeling like I have no value if I don't go back and sit down at the children's table with everybody else. You know,
Mhm.
Hui.
Mhm. Mhm. Good stuff, man. You've been through a lot.
Oh yes. Oh
Been through a
man.
lot. So tell the audience where and what time to watch you.
Yes. All right. So you can watch us on YouTube every Sunday at noon Central Standard Time. We do Sunday sessions. Now, on my Monday through Friday content, I'm pretty much going hard on the deconstruction and showing you how harmful certain doctrines are. Our Sunday content is more community focused. It's personal growth, it's community development. We're starting a new series. Well, we'll probably be past that series by then, but for example, we're going into a series now called Through the Looking Glass, where we're going to be exploring how what we've been through, how where we've lived, who we were raised by, even some of the media we've been exposed to, how it may shape the way not only that we see the world, but the way that we see ourselves in it. A major part of what we're doing with Bridge City is building conversations that matter so that we can all feel a little stronger, feel a little better, so that we can all do a little better. That's really the
Mhm.
whole goal. Other than that, if you type my name in Google, it's unique enough. You type my name in, you'll find me as Darante LaMar. I'm on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok as of now. I don't really be on Twitter. It's a little annoying over there.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. I've enjoyed our conversation
Thank you.
and
Thank you.
enjoyed learning more about you. Um, yeah, it was good. It's real good. I appreciate you.
Oh man,
Yeah.
thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us on this journey of deconstruction and self discovery. Remember, reclaiming your life is a process, not a destination. Keep questioning, keep evolving, and most importantly, keep embracing the freedom that comes with your truth. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with someone who's also on the path of reclaiming their life. Until next time, reclaim your life, rewrite your story, and live your truth unapologetically.